intersects in one plane, it's only going to get one cut. But if you space it out like that, make it 3D. Now, when this goes in and turns, it's going to cut every way throughout. But I need a computer program that would generatively do that, and then use those pieces.
Generatively do that.
Like I want this piece and this piece, and I want to throw this one on, and it will shear right through it. And now I want to take those pieces.
That's a simple Boolean command, man.
There you go. See, I didn't even know.
That's a simple Boolean in Rhino. Well, the command is simple, but you'll probably have a bunch of objects layered on top of each other, so it's going to be a little bit.
I'm not that versed in Rhino, so I'd have to go into Rhino and start YouTubing the shit out of it.
On it. That's not even too big. It's just a solid one.
No, I'm saying like YouTube tutorials.
Yeah.
Just boom, boom, boom.
I mean, this is the thing is that I'm glad you kind of established this mode and this methodology. And we could have another hour and a half conversation on 5 different directions out of this thing, which we need to have. And I'm glad that you've kind of inserted yourself in a lineage, right? I'd like you to kind of understand, or at least present some of that lineage at another time. You know, like you got to kind of understand that a little bit, where it's come from, where you're critical of it, where you think it's going, and then we need to get your position on architecture. And then we can figure some of this other stuff out. Because if we don't have your position on architecture, we can't really make a decision, even just within a simple idea about that. It's like, what are we running against?
Yeah.
Are we running against space? Are we running against surface? Are we running against program? How do we qualify and quantify them? You know, those lines that you're abstracting, are those just random lines, or are they like proportional to bacon?
No, they were random for this presentation purposes.
The more specific
just
you
to like
get,
spit the idea out.
no, for sure, but the more, it comes through. But the more specific you get, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah.
Right? And that specificity, the little specificities, manipulated, add up to a ton of complexity. Right? Because when we try to go through and we were to model all these things out, say we were to take all those objects, we model all those blend objects out, we put it with some booleans, we try to boolean together, dude, you do not want to edit complexity. You want to generate complexity, but you do not want to be the guy that edits it. It's a lot better now. Anybody got any questions for Josh? Questions, clarification?
It just takes off that, as a presenter.
How does the gang, can you tell me exactly why you're interested in this methodology? What it does for you, like what are the qualities that you're picking off? You're thinking it'll find you as center?
I like the idea that it's going nowhere while it's still going to end up somewhere. Like it's the way you get to somewhere is far more interesting, I think, than the final product. So it's a lineage of I didn't even know really what that was like years ago, 1-2 years ago, the deconstructed method, all that stuff. So I just knew that was the idea that I liked about architecture, and I had to seek out the actual deconstructing it. So like, oh, these people are firing on the same parameters
They don't have
that I'm interested in.
They have fuel injection systems. Almost all vehicles these days.
So the exploration is
Injection systems.
I don't know, it's really fun to go down this path. So it's like I want to take another step. I want to take another step, but at some point you got to step.
Nuon, what do you have to say about this stuff, man?
So it's just kind of a play on words to try and get at the notion that something needs to change about it. I chose this light bulb, which is really kind of faint in the background, but as it's sort of a metaphorical idea, and it's also a graphical idea. I was actually looking for a little bit of the helix generating and the idea of the light bulb is an idea, but the purpose of the helix is that editing it process that I'm describing here is something that's cyclical and repeating. And so there's
I think that's where the
things that I think are on the
guess I think that's where the design aspect comes into it, because that's where it kind of elevates to. Now I have all these random fragmented pieces. How can I realistically put this together to make it function as a space in order to portray an emotion or something as you walk through doing it? It's like not, we already kind of touched on the last discussion, not to be a third-person architecture.
It's got to function so many different things.
Yeah.
Some of them are shorter than others because we have to submit our pieces.
It's exciting stuff. It's just like, I don't know, this one person, I think I have a hard time just like walking in the dark.
This one is shorter because we got to.
Yeah, I've really grown to like it too. It's the opposite. Work has to be done in about 3 days done. So I'm kind of like walking with your lights off. You know?
So anyway,
So I've listed basically the sequence here that we have for this quarter.
A little bit of quality.
Obviously,
This
the
sounds
assembly,
really
the piece of design manual.
You just go until it ends until you're satisfied.
And while that's being
Yeah.
published, I'm going to be starting.
Not gonna work in, so that's a
Some of
rough
this is
approach,
already done.
especially in
One of the
times like these.
pieces that
But
I'm
not super mean times like these all the time.
setting up is a thesis.
Well, then if you want to go to another level above that, you can post rationalize what you did.
Professionals that come up with on my team essentially.
A theory of connectivity on why this makes sense in this specific spot.
If this process makes sense to you, it makes sense to you. Like that's it.
There are some things that are
You
also
can call reach out for this process. You can call crying out for this process. This is your process, and this is the way you're evaluating things and you're interpreting it. Now there's a huge quagmire of issues that you have here, but those can be addressed and evaluated. Right? I mean, that means that like every time you make a decision, it has to be a decision. It can't just be based off of aesthetic judgment.
Yeah. So there's a program in place.
Right? You gotta realize what you're going forward, going after, how that kind of qualitative and quantitative at this point in the 12 people we have different qualitative and quantitative, like you need to really hone in on that, right? Especially at these kind of primitive modes.
And then that's it, you're constantly bouncing back and forth.
Keep saying primitive, will you define that for me?
Like this is this is.
I agree with that.
One would be if we have this is his primitive, right? And now his primitive, which starts as this, goes through a series of transformations, and he has this, and this. Right? At this point, we can swing this one out here, and we can swing this one down here, and we can make a decision that fits this, and this. Now these variables can be anything that you want them to be. It can be programmatic, can be aesthetic, can be whatever, theoretical, it could be financial, whatever. This could be this, and this. Right? So you do that for each one of these things. And then this object either changes or stays the same. So this one maybe comes back to a cube. Maybe this one ends up being kind of, a diamond. Maybe these things kind of cross-reference with each other, right? So this one hits, say, it hits aesthetically, it hits, formally, it hits programmatically. This one only hit, this one hits really well aesthetically. This one hits really well such and such. Okay, now I need to combine these two things. Right? So now I have this situation. Right? Then we go again. We bring this one down here. We bring this one down here.
It's kind of like your catalog. You're creating this database of so much information where you can go through and start picking things, with design objectives.
Yeah, no, again, it's pretty sick. Sounds incredibly complex.
But it starts with a square, or it starts with a few lines.
Primitive.
This is not your primitive.
That's complex.
This can be your primitive, but this primitive needs to then get dissected out, right? So, one instance would be, hey, if we were to kind of look at this kind of in a sci-fi way and say this is some sort of cellular component, right? We have this object here. I would argue that this is already complex enough.
You've already got rules associated. You've got rules.
Well, in this case, Josh would have to abstract or, isolate the rules, right? So one could be like, I created this primitive, right? Because I wanted this primitive to, one, have a surface element, two, have an aesthetic agenda,
Is it going to be the same?
three, have a structural element, Right? So he would have to then isolate what area is going to be surface, what area is going to be structural, and how to actually position this stuff. Like maybe this is like a 2 on the aesthetic scale, but this one's like working really good here. This is like a 9, and this is like a 5. Like we like the posture of this, right? So now we kind of have to combine these 3 together to get the right aesthetic. Then we have to
It's an
isolate the
evolution of
surface.
quality, like the best that come out of whatever situation, then get moved to the next round.
Yeah.
To get.
Here he starts with a little bit of complexity, and then he edits it down to the square. That's right. Right? So he starts with a surface agenda, a structural agenda, and an aesthetic agenda. Right? He then breaks that down into basically a square. Versus starting with the square, breaking it into these fragments for X, Y, and Z, and then the complexity eventually builds to this. Right? So this is more generative per se. Right? But then you have to edit the generative. You know, what's the generative giving you? It's the novel, right? Like you should really become familiar with the idea of the novel and be really comfortable with the idea of the novel. Right? Isolating, reading information, evaluating information, stuff that you didn't normally conceive, right? So you have to be really, really, really concerned and really, really comfortable with your tool set. Right? Like the computer is giving me this that I don't really have control over, but I kind of do because I'm inserting the variables, right? But you have to be okay with what the computer is giving
Novel, like would you also be referencing the book Novel Tectonics that deals with stuff like this?
There's some novel, yeah, there's a lot of novel in the novel tectonics for sure.
Probably because of the timeline. The timeline, there is beginning and end.
You got camp words, man. I've got a camp words.
But you've got a methodology, you have a working process, and you have a lineage. What you don't have is you don't have an argument. Right? All of those people contribute to your argument, but you don't have an argument. You need to know what architecture is for you, how it functions, where it functions, where it's right, where it's wrong. And we can go from there. And you should probably get it, like you need to get going on more, like a lot more of these experiments, isolating, etc., etc. Right? Because eventually I'm going to come to you and say, all right, now you have an argument, what are we going to do? What are we going to work on? Are we going to work on a museum? Okay, cool. What do you want to focus on? You want to focus on vertical circulation, or you want to focus on the facade systems? You know, you want to focus on the atrium?
What he's presenting right now and what he presented 2 or 3 weeks ago.
That's what
Like when he's talking about the circulation going around
I think I'm still
downtown
going to
into the
move forward
building, like that's totally random in a sense.
That's fine.
but with this methodology.
For sure, that's fine. But we need to know, like I'm saying, like each one of these things, if you choose stadium and circulation, it needs to be really specific and pointed to each one of these things.
And maybe the
You
diagram.
know, you can't just choose one and just be like, yeah, I feel like doing it.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to be able to, because then we can say, okay, well, what does these things do? Like, you know, these primitives as they are right now, not really going to help you out with circulation unless you're starting to think about different modes of circulation, right? Ideas about lines and blending and things like that, sequencing, yeah, that helps you out with the circulation argument, right? So we know that we need to be focusing on this stuff a little bit more than say things that have the ability to add up to something or become volumetric, programs becoming reductive.
It may only be one little chunk of something on there.
Right.
So a lot more of this stuff,
Because even the way that plays.
and get into the Rhino stuff like ASAP. And you got to figure out how to use, if that's, you know, if you're gonna go towards isolation and Boolean, like that's volume, right? It's a volumetric problem. How do you start with the volume and insert the circulation, right? Like you're working in the modes that, you know, you're setting yourself up here. Just remember that, you know, learn the tools, get the specificity, understand, you know, simplicity building towards complexity.
This
Right?
is
And then we got to get you an argument.
what this is.
Right.
But this is a huge step.
You've taken the design process on.
You know, like when you look everything in nature, like it looks super complex and super kind of organic. But at the end of the day, you can kind of trim it down to one mathematical equation. Probably comes back to somewhere, shape, or form the Fibonacci sequence.
We're looking at schools that we're really looking at this one section, but then, jumping in as.
Any questions,
It
clarifications?
makes it just bigger.